Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Reach Lowell Presents the Health and Wellness of our Black, Indigenous People of Color series focused on our Asian community. My name is Linda Junflin, and I serve as the Program Director for Reach Lowell. I would like to start off by thanking our collaborators and contributors for this evening's event, inclusive of Lowell Community Health Center, the DEI Consortium of Lowell, Enterprise Bank, and their Center for Hope and Healing. In addition to our agency contributors, I wanted to thank our ad hoc planning committee members listed here. Thank you for your time, your thoughts and feedback in developing the conversation for today. And before we go into the meat of our conversation today, I just want to take the opportunity to introduce you to a little bit about REACH and what we are hoping to accomplish here. REACH Lowell is a program funded by the Centers for Disease Control. REACH actually stands for Racial and Ethnic Approaches to Community Health. And so as it pertains to this series, we thought it was really vital and important to create spaces for communities of color to have conversations that are focused specifically about our own health and well-being, and obviously as it relates to our day-to-day work along with the community that we live in. As I mentioned, the Health Center, Lowell Community Health Center, is the lead of this coalition, and we are working alongside many great partners with the mission to eliminate disparities among our Southeast Asian and Latinx community, really with a focus area on diabetes, but knowing that diabetes is one component of one's health, hence the reason why we thought the series, bringing it to a broader conversation, was important. This lists our Reach Lowell partners, which we are very thankful for, because the Health Center may be the lead in this work, but we are not able to do this work without the collaboration and subject matter experts from our partnering agencies. And as I mentioned, today we really were hoping to create this space for our Asian community leaders to come together to discuss topics and share strategies on how we can take care of oneself and to find a path forward for our community. We welcome our allies who are here in solidarity, and hope that you can come into this space to learn and to listen and to continue to provide the support that you have all been giving us thus far. The timeline that you viewed in the beginning of the start of the program was adapted from the Asian American Commission Community Action Guide, along with remarks from Liana Kushi, who spoke to our Lowell City Council a month or so back. And it really was hoped to shed some light to give folks just a little glimpse into what the Asian American or Asian experience has been as it pertains to the history of the United States of America, and recognize that this space in this conversation may be just the tip of the iceberg in regards to bringing the Pan-Asian community together here in Lowell. And tonight we are very much excited to be featuring Dr. Sue Kim, who's joining us and will be providing some opening reflections and speaking to the topics that you'll get a chance to be able to discuss later today. Dr. Sue Kim obviously serves as the co-director for Center Asian American Studies at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, but is also so much, very much engaged in various different levels in the community, and has become such an advocate and champion of the Asian community and many communities across the city here. And so we're so fortunate to have her on our side and providing space and voice for our community members. So now I would like to turn it over to Sue, and I will stop my share.
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Sue Kim. I'm a second-generation Korean-American woman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a proud resident of Lowell. I've lived in Lowell since 2011, and my family frequently asks me if I work for the Lowell Chamber of Commerce now, because I'm such a Lowell Lowell booster. I wanted to start by thanking the planning committee, and especially Linda, who invited me to speak, but everyone who's working on it. from the big ideas to the tech. I know it always takes a team. So I'm just going to speak briefly today about reflecting on the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd and the long history of racial injustice and oppression, the connection among communities of color, and the impact on the mental health of our communities. And I'll be fairly brief, and then we'll have just a very short time for discussion. I know a lot of you, so thank you so much for coming. So I guess, first, reflecting on the anniversary, as many of you know, 2 days ago, May 5th, marked the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Those 9 minutes and something seconds that ignited a worldwide movement that was built on centuries of history, right? I'd also like to note that May 31st to June 1st, as many of you know, also is the anniversary of the Tulsa race massacre. And I think many of you probably know that because they've been covering that in the news to some extent on when the Black Wall Street in Tulsa was destroyed by a racist mob. Also, other dates in May include May 6th, 1882, was when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed into law. This was the first immigration law that was specifically focused on ethnicity and nationality, right? It was the beginning not only of exclusion of people of color, but it was actually the beginning of the definition of legal immigration, right? Prior to this, the idea of illegal immigration did not really exist, right? So those very concepts came from that. Another important date that I didn't even realize, it's because it's been so long, May 17th, 2017, was when Huat versus Lowell, that a lawsuit was filed. So the lawsuit, as many of you know, I was one of the plaintiffs. It was a coalition of Asian American and Latino voters of Lowell who sued the city of Lowell for being in violation of the Voting Rights Act that has resulted in a settlement and now the city election system has changed, and the very, very important election system, the election happening this year, is a result of that. And also just to note all the dates shown at the beginning of the video. And this goes, I think, to my first point, which is that every day is an anniversary of racism. Every day that we live is embedded in the history of structural racism and the systemic violence it wreaks on our bodies, minds, and souls, right? And I think it's worth noting that, and this is why we say, sorry, my parents' grandfather clock is chiming. This is why we say, and that we still affirm, that racism is a public health crisis. In Lowell, in Massachusetts, in the United States, and across the world, white supremacy is a pandemic that hurts us every day, all of us. Alongside the continuing pandemics of patriarchy, heteronormativity, ableism, and so many other systems that just make us unable to see other beings in their full, beautiful selves as themselves. White supremacy hurts all of us. It makes us doubt ourselves, hate one another, turn one another. And so this is why I want to quote a good friend of mine, Jennifer Ho, who is the president of the Association for Asian American Studies, and other people have said this too, that white supremacy is the root of all anti-Asian racism, right? White supremacy is always going to try to pit people against each other, particularly people of color, in a kind of game, zero-sum game of fighting for crumbs. But it is so important to understand white supremacy is the engine that drives the cultural and institutional racism of the world that we live in today, and that many of us on this call and beyond are working so hard to dismantle. And the implications of this go everywhere, right? It's a simple line: white supremacy is the engine that drives racism. But this informs everything from the fact that almost all Asians today in the United States are products of histories of colonialism, imperialism, and the Cold War, right? It is what motivates the very important, the simple but earth-shattering claim that Black Lives Matter, right? That we affirm that Black Lives Matter, and such three simple words have shaken the world, and it really threatens people to such a deep level, right? Because white supremacy is so entrenched. And it also, I mean, I just want to say also, si se puede, right? Like, even as we're struggling with all these kinds of things, yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can change these things. So as we gather here today, I just want to take a moment, and we will go into breakout rooms to discuss this. As public health restrictions are being lifted across the country and the world, we gather to remind ourselves and others that these other long-standing pandemics continue. In the past year and a half, we saw the entire world go into lockdown to respond to a pandemic that was shocking and earth-shattering because it was so visible. But these pandemics of racism, sexism, gender policing, ableism, and others have become so normalized, both as microaggressions as well as systemic racism and violence, in our personal and professional lives, in the very ways we think and talk, that too many people have become accustomed to it, right? And so it's so important to remember, and I'm guilty of this as anyone, that we are all carrying so much weight, right? And I just want to, just two quick personal examples. I'm a lifelong sufferer of clinical depression. Like, it started with eating disorders when I was a teenager, and I'm sure I was depressed since I was probably 14 or something like that. I'm a big proponent of, antidepressants, medication, and therapy. And I always say yoga and pets changed my life, right? And it's so critical. I work a lot with college-age kids, and so many of them are kind of in a well of depression and despair or anxiety. And they don't know that that life can be different, right? Because they're so young, like me, I was probably depressed since I was 14 to maybe 20 or so. It wasn't until my later 20s that I realized life does not have to be like this, right? So that self-care is critical. And I think, I'm terrible at taking care of myself, but that it is key. And that in many ways, I have built these things into my life in order so that I can continue to function and to make the change that I want to see in the world. Another example of the hidden weight that we carry all the time, I've told the story before, and it's a very small thing. I was born in the United States. I grew up in the United States. I've always been incredibly aware of being in a multiracial society, right? When I was in college, I went to South Korea for the first time, where my parents immigrated from. And South Korea is not like, a utopia by any means, right? I'm not saying that. But just in terms of racial terms, I just remember a very clear, visceral feeling. I remember very vividly sitting on the subway and looking around and saying, everyone in this car is Korean, right? It was a moment of realization for me, where I realized it wasn't until the weight of racism and a kind of racial awareness was lifted that I realized that doesn't have to be like that, right? So in the same way as that, people who are always in the thick of things, sometimes you don't realize how painful things are until you have a moment when suddenly that thing is lifted, or that thing has changed, right? So it is so critical as we do our work to take care of ourselves. And I'm saying that to myself as well. And so the last thing that I wanted to say, as we all work together to dismantle structural racism and white supremacy, is that when we talk about mental health, right, we also really need to talk about the real social and institutional changes that are needed to make us the best version of ourselves, to enable us to be the best version of ourselves. And this includes things like ending racism, patriarchy, heteronormativity, ableism, neo-imperialism, dismantling systemic racism, a living wage, health and wellness benefits for all, safe and secure housing, universal health care, universal childcare. There are so many things that have become normalized in our society that really are huge burdens. So I guess my last thing that I just wanted to say was that it's so important to listen, right? Listen to others, to lift up others' voices, to uplift all voices so they can be heard and listened to, and to most important, to listen to yourself. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sue. And thank you for being so open and transparent with your own battles. And as I know, that helps with supporting, creating that trusting space for us to continue the dialogue. So we just wanted to give a couple of minutes. I mean, I know that we're amongst friends and many people do know Sue very well, but if we had a question or two before we shifted gears into the breakouts that we're going to have for a majority of the conversation this evening.
Easy, thank you. You know, I always tell all my students and everyone, you know, about my own history of clinical depression. And I've had students literally say to me, but you're so happy, right? I think a psychologist when I was in college really said it well to me once. She said, you know, if you had diabetes or cancer, you wouldn't think twice about trying to get help, right? Trying to seek therapies, trying to seek medication, right? But we still have such a stigma about this, right? And I think it's in sort of, you know, white mainstream society, but as we know, many of us, you know, in our communities, it's like an extra, you know, stigma, right? A cultural stigma. And so it's so important to talk about it all the time. Bobby, I don't know, why are you so dope?
All the loves and all of the shout outs. Thank you, everyone. So anyone else, a question or a comment for Sue before we shift? Here, do you see the Sue? The question is, how do you address issues of mental health for immigrant parents? Stigma, the norms at play are critical.
This is very difficult. I'm very lucky that I think my parents at least came from a place, they didn't understand, but they came from a place of, we don't understand, but we love you and we're going to try to understand, right? And I think this is one way to approach it, right? That actually, and this actually works in general when you're discussing something with someone, to say that you yourself are coming from a place of learning, right? And that we can learn about whatever, you know, about mental health and or the specific issues together, right? And that it is really about care and love and trying to understand what's best for the person, right? It's also a possibility that there are also people who are experts in this, right? I mean, like Niem Nekret, who's here, right? And Linda, right? And Monica, you know, people who have extensive experience talking about issues of mental health and wellness with members of, you know, various members of the community, youth and elders, right? That you don't have to sort of, I'm a big believer in that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? If there are people who have experience in these kinds of things, and we have lots of people in this room with this, you know, lots of experience, to reach out to them and to ask for help. I mean, I think, yes, you know, that's the short answer, but I'm happy to talk more for sure. Oh, racism is so entrenched in this country, it's definitely gotten a lot worse. So I think I'm also a big believer of doing all the things, I mean, like all the things at big and little, right? And not all at once, but like every little bit helps, right? I mean, at the university, we're, you know, also having the, you know, DEI committees, and it always has to be an ongoing process of hearts and minds, individual conversations, as well as systemic change, right? Like policies and laws and those kinds of things. And everybody is different. So everybody has different strengths, right? Like I mean, I have feelings, but like, you know, I mean, I prefer to work in the world of policy and like institutional structures and things like that. But every little bit helps, right? So whether I feel like it's very important, whether it's talking to a family member or a neighbor or a classmate or, another parent, of your kids, friends, parents, something like that. Or it's, writing to the city council or running for office, right? Or voting, right? I think it's really critical that we do this. And I just want to say the last thing before we break, because this is, we have to go to the breakout rooms. Remember, think in historical terms, right? I don't, in the 2016 election, if people only under the age of 30 had voted, right? And this is not to say like our elders and, people of all ages are wonderful, right? But if only people under the age of 30 had voted, every state except one would have been blue, right? I mean, I work with college students every day. And for those of you who work with high school students, the tide of history is turning, right? I mean, it is slow and painful, right, at times, but the tide of history is turning. And this is why I think that white supremacy has been so virulent in the last few, years, because white supremacy, like patriarchy, it is not going down without a fight, right? Like it is absolutely not going down without a fight. But the tide of history, I mean, whenever, I work with young people, I feel optimism for the future, despite the difficulty of recent years, because they get it on a kind of generational way, right? And so the future is in great hands, right? We just need to keep pushing it in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Sue, for your reflections. And I know we could go on the entire session just going back and forth with these conversations, but the hope is that for tonight that we are able to dig a little deeper. Hopefully this encourages us to prioritize continuing to create spaces like this for ourselves as well as the larger community. So we've dedicated some time for each group to share a couple of takeaways that so that others who weren't in your particular breakout room could hear a little bit. So if you could just get like a really quick synopsis of like what the conversation was, the topic matter, and then what were the takeaways. So if we could start off with the topic number one.
I can do a quick report out. I know there were some people that have some quick comments to say after. And a lot of the things that were spoken about were basically thank you for spotlighting me, but generalizing people because of how they look or what their names sound like, assuming you are a high achieving student just because of your name and your background, and assuming your profession, where you work because of these things. And then just different microaggressions that we experience through life, like speaking, like, do you even speak English, or comments like that may affect people. And then there's those hidden microaggressions that people are not quite aware of that are happening and that may actually affect people without them knowing. And then one thing that was also like hugely talked about was putting people into boxes and categorizing people automatically. And then some solutions we talked about were correcting. Once we hear things happening, just making sure to correct those things. And then making sure that you do some generational education between your family, the young ones, the elders, and things like that. Anyone want to add anything?
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the next topic was focused on colorism among cultural groups, facilitated by Ming Niem and Naren.
Our topic of discussion was around colorism within cultures. The first question was what colorism means to you and what word comes to mind when you think of colorism. And a couple of the key takeaway from that was the first thing that comes to mind was beauty. Colorism is, people are treated based on their skin color. People think that, lighter is better. Darker is more inferior. And it's also seen as or associated with class and how you get treated. If people think that if you are a darker skin color, you're probably lower class. You're not as clean. You're not as intelligent. The second question that we had was, what are some of the solutions that you might have to help the community move forward around the topic of colorism. And one of the main thing that keeps coming up is, having that conversation with your household, with your family, with your friends, being self-aware. The work is long, it's ongoing. One of the other solutions that were brought up was, push back in all the spaces that we can, whether it's within families, whether if it's in policies that are being created around, citizens, and trying not to stay silent, speak up. And I believe that's all that we have for this topic. Anybody else want to chime in?
Other things I would add would be organizations. Bobby was sharing in our group was that, Avatar was the experience of his son, there was only certain type of avatar is available, or only certain, our white doll is available. So I think the other thing is an organization. When we are doing publications, social medias, anything to reach our public, then it should be more inclusive of other image beside that layer skin tone.
Ming, Naren, and everyone who participated in that group. I think just one commentary is that in the planning process, one of the things that came up in regards to the conversation around features and in addition to color of skin came up in regards to like living in a space or a time where, you wanted a certain type of bridge for your nose, or like being kind of, picked on or teased by even your own family members because of like the expectation of that high standard of beauty, and a lot of that times that standard was being held to a European standard, right, to that white standard, and so like we didn't necessarily label it like to add the feature the physical features, but that definitely comes along with the conversation when you're talking about skin and skin tone. And then our third group was the importance of cultural literacy, facilitated by Bangwara and Mana.
Yes, hi. So the first question we shared, different people were sharing similarly commonalities of their background dealing with racism and being bullied. So P and I talked about us coming to the US and really recognizing our differences on the fact of racism. And same thing for Stacy, if I could mention that to her, growing up in a predominantly white community and middle class, and knowing that you are different, just by that fact alone. And also when we did our, the whiteboard and our identity, one thing that really stuck out was the fact of we need to stop calling each other like that melting pot. We're not a melting pot. We're like we identify more as a salad bowl because we're more different. We're all unique. We wanted to celebrate our identity and acceptance of others. We wrote down tradition, language. Those are the kind of things that we identify with. Ethnicity, cross-cultural. And then someone mentioned iceberg, which I love. Actually, Mena mentioned iceberg. And then also growing up without role model, how difficult that is. And then also we're being compared to our white counterpart, and growing up with parents comparing you to other other children or other youth, that, oh, they're prettier or they're nicer, and no praises from our family because our community don't say don't say you're beautiful or you're kind or you're nice, you're not smart. So those growing up with that really affected someone. And then I shared that I didn't have the support, so my parents didn't go to my middle school graduation, didn't go to my high school graduation, none of those, because our culture, the standard is finish high school and go to work, and that was it. And then someone brought up double standards, like we have a double standard for male, female, and we had to deal with that as well. I know I'm saying too much, but let's see, what am I missing? So for self-care, someone mentioned, one other things, someone mentioned that they didn't hear the word "I love you" or "sorry," not enough of that. And we didn't give ourselves permission to really see who we are and understand. But for self-care, family is the top priority that supports us in our wellness, and writing. And I love Ronnie. She wrote down she loves walking at the mall as her self-care. So yeah, that's from our group.
Thank you, Bong.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bong P, who's going to give us some closing reflections and lead us to the close of the event tonight.
Thank you, Linda. As we have just heard, read, saw, and conversed, anti-Asian sentiment began since 1849, when Chinese immigrants arrived to work in the gold mines of California. Over the next 150 years or so, even the government was a part of excluding Asians and Asian Pacific Islanders, not only on the topic of immigration, but on other policies as well. We've seen that, whenever there's an incident that happens where an Asian nation or group of people are blamed, there have been increased rates of hate crimes and even violent acts and murder, as we've seen recently. All of these hate crimes, discriminatory actions, and for the AAPI, as well as other BIPOC communities, we have this struggle that we always have to fit in, we always have to thrive, we have to survive. They've hopefully allowed us to develop both physical and mental resilience to deal with both, life both inside and outside our homes, but when we put that much pressure, when there's so much pressure, these conditions, as Professor Soo Kim shared, they've affected our bodies and our souls. We hope that you've taken away some tips and advice, in each of the breakout rooms that will best fit with your style. If we are to continue working through the challenges of the structural and systemic racism that have existed over the 400+ years of American history. Self-care is so critical. Agreed, Professor Soo Kim. Thank you for reminding us that. I hope that you will be able to find a couple of activities or things that can give you happiness or that can help you heal, even it's just to get by one day at a time. I myself have learned that although there's so much wrong around us, there's also right things that we can appreciate. This could come in the form of appreciating what you have or participating in an activity that you enjoy. Growing flowers, for example, some of it gives me a sense of accomplishment once I see the beautiful blooms, and I like to share that, with other people. Being at the beach and outdoors allows me to feel immersed with nature and feel at one with the world. Being able to be with my friend is, of course, another opportunity to see the joys in life. The I love yous, that Bora had mentioned, I say that very often to my kids. My parents never said that to me, and don't tell him that, but well, he knows, but I don't even know how to say I love you to my husband because that's how I grew up, but to my kids, I say it, every night, every morning. And it's so, it just feels so good to hear them say it back, So whether it's meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, swimming, art, music, acting, writing, hiking, reading, or other activities, I hope you can find something that can make your body feel better and help soothe, yes, dogs, cats, pets, help soothe your soul, because we still have a lot to fight for. And then I'm just going to take Stacey Thompson's final words from the breakout room. She says, we need to keep protecting our peace and know that no one deserves our energy all the time. And it is okay to have me time. So I just wanted to, provide some of those thoughts. And then I don't know if anybody has any other questions or comments before we talk about some of the upcoming things.
Can I say one thing, Sophie? This is Bobby.
Sure.
We are beautiful. That's all.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Bobby.
We talked about that in our group too, definition of beauty and all of that.
I just wanted to share kind of the upcoming health and wellness series, that the group is planning for the next few months. Thank you everyone for joining us. And, there was a lot of vulnerable, stories that were shown, personal stories that were shared today. And we hope that, even though we struggle, we've been struggling year after year, we hope that you can also find a way to take care of ourselves and our loved ones, because they are the most important, and we are too, we are important too. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all enjoy the beautiful summer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.